Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we really try to dig into sources and research to pull out the key insights for you.
That's right.
Have you ever found yourself, making something complicated when it seemed pretty straightforward, or maybe waiting for a problem to really hit you maybe more than once before you actually learned the lesson?
Mm-mm. Happens all the time.
Well, today we're diving into some profound ancient wisdom that actually sheds surprising light on exactly those kinds of very human tendencies.
Indeed. And our mission for this deep dive, specifically, is to unpack some key verses. We're looking at Kif Surasi, or the cave chapter,
Yeah.
verses 54 through 56.
Okay.
And the goal is really to extract these timeless insights about, well, human nature, our often kind of complicated relationship with guidance, and the surprisingly consistent consequences of the choices we end up making.
And for you, our listener, think of this deep dive as maybe a bit of a shortcut.
Yeah.
It's a way to understand why we so often get caught in these cycles, Cycles of endless debate or piling on these self-imposed burdens, or maybe just delaying action on guidance that, when you look at it, seems remarkably clear.
Right.
Recognizing these patterns, both in ourselves, in the world around us, it can genuinely unlock a more informed path, maybe more fulfilling, and ultimately, hopefully, a less overwhelming way to navigate life.
Absolutely. It's about seeing where we might be, perhaps inadvertently creating our own obstacles, or maybe missing opportunities for real growth.
Exactly, seeing those patterns.
And just before we properly dive into the core of our discussion today, we'd be really grateful if you'd consider supporting us by subscribing to our channel.
Yeah, that support really helps us keep bringing these deep dives to you. Please do subscribe if you find this valuable.
Okay, so let's get started.
Right. Let's unpack this first part. Now, for those who joined us for our previous deep dive, you might remember we spent a good chunk of time talking about that really profound story of Adam and the angels.
Foundational stuff.
Yeah, and we explored this concept of humanity's haliflik, our role as stewards, or caliphs, you could say, here on Earth.
And the core idea there was pretty radical, actually. It suggested that all powers, which were symbolically represented by the angels in that narrative, are essentially meant to serve humanity.
But there was a huge condition, wasn't there?
A crucial one. This only holds true if we truly act as Adam, meaning a fully developed, responsible, conscious human being, stepping into that potential.
And we talked about that stark choice that comes from the narrative. You either embrace that true human potential, step into that stewardship role, or you choose what we termed an Iblis-like path.
Right. And just to quickly recap for anyone new, Iblis-like, it refers to this kind of rebellious, unexamined, maybe envious disposition, and unwillingness to really acknowledge the inherent dignity and potential within humanity. And the consequence of choosing that latter path, as the narrative suggests, was this kind of restless, unhappy existence, an internal turmoil, really, even if you're surrounded by what look like external blessings or advantages.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that true fulfillment isn't just about what's outside, but about that internal alignment with perhaps our intended purpose.
Absolutely. And that foundational idea, this inherent human potential and the critical choices we make, it perfectly sets the stage for Kif Surasi, verse 54.
Okay, so let's hear it. What does verse 54 say?
The verse states, "And we have certainly explained in this reading for humanity every kind of example, yet humanity is the most quarrelsome of all creatures."
Wow. Okay, so right there, that's where it gets really interesting for me, because it opens with this incredibly strong, emphatic statement about divine clarity.
Certainly explained.
Yeah.
Every kind of example.
And then immediately pivots to humanity's, notorious tendency for contention and argument.
It's a striking contrast. And what's truly fascinating here is that phrase, "we have certainly explained every kind of example." Our source dives into the original Arabic, suggesting a possible meaning behind it is that it was sarafina yaptik. Now, that implies it was explained in intricate detail, processed carefully, clarified almost like a master jeweler or a money changer, meticulously evaluating gold.
Ah, okay, so not just explained, but explained with precision.
Exactly. Precision, thoroughness, leaving no real room for genuine ambiguity or confusion. And importantly, this clarity isn't just limited to the revealed text like the Quran itself.
Right.
It also extends to what the source calls the yazga, the inherent laws, the divine decree, the natural order that's evident in the entire universe.
So you're saying it's not just scripture, but the very fabric of reality, the way things work.
That's the implication. From the smallest particle to the grandest cosmic laws,
Yeah.
from physics to the principles for a healthy society, it suggests everything is presented clearly, understandably, if, and it's a big if, we approach it with the right perspective and an open mind.
So the universe itself is kind of speaking a clear language if we just learn how to listen. The blueprint is accessible.
Precisely. The message, the principles, the guidance, it's presented as direct. No inherent difficulty, no unnecessary complexity deliberately built in.
Okay, so the implication then is, well, it's profound, isn't it? If the message is clear, if reality itself guides us, then any difficulty or obscurity we feel, it's not inherent in the message itself.
That's what the verse seems to suggest. The complexity, the endless debates, the burdens we place on ourselves, the confusion, they often arise not from the guidance or the design of reality, but from our own inclinations, our human predispositions.
Which brings us right back to that core paradox in the verse. If the guidance is so clear, laid out with such precision, why is humanity the most quarrelsome of all creatures? Exarashe and Cuddalin.
Yeah, why?
Why do we, despite this apparent clarity, seem to prefer arguing and debating? Often, to the point where we actually muddy waters that were crystal clear to begin with.
It's a fundamental question about us, isn't it? And our source provides some incredibly relatable examples to illustrate this.
Like,
Well, think about a simple daily practice like ablution, the ritual washing.
okay.
A straightforward instruction, say, wash your face, seems clear enough. But often, it leads to unnecessary debate about specifics. For instance, arguing whether you must wash it exactly 3 times, even if the original source doesn't state that number as some kind of strict mandatory requirement.
Ah, right. Adding rules.
Exactly. It's a classic example of adding self-imposed rules, adding restrictions where maybe none were strictly needed, turning a simple, potentially freeing act into something burdened by meticulous, perhaps unnecessary detail.
It's like being given an open door and immediately starting to build a fence around it. Drawing lines in the sand, creating these arbitrary barriers.
That's a great way to put it. Or, to take a more dramatic example the source reminds us of, from Bakara Sarazi, the story of the calf sacrifice.
I remember that one.
The children of Israel were commanded, sacrifice a calf. Simple enough, right?
Seems straightforward.
But instead of just doing it, they got caught up in endless, unnecessary questions. What gender should it be? What color? How old? What did it eat? Each question, each detail they demanded, effectively restricted their own freedom. It complicated the task enormously and delayed their action.
Making it way harder than it needed to be.
They turned a clear command into a labyrinth of their own making through contention.
And that is incredibly relatable. It's not just ancient history or religious practice. How often do we see this in just our everyday lives?
All the time.
I mean, overanalyzing a simple instruction in a work email until you're paralyzed. Or seeking endless details for a project instead of just starting. Adding layers of complexity to perfectly clear principles in, say, parenting or relationships. We do this constantly, don't we?
Absolutely, it's everywhere. Think about a team at work. They get a clear goal, improve customer satisfaction. Simple enough. But instead of brainstorming solutions and acting, they might spend weeks debating the exact phrasing of the goal, the precise metrics, the optimal communication channel.
Analysis paralysis.
Right. Even when a good enough approach, just starting, would yield immediate progress. Or look at personal finance. The core advice is crystal clear. Save more than you spend.
Can't get much clearer than that.
But people get bogged down in endless debates about the perfect budgeting app or the ideal investment strategy, delaying the fundamental action of actually saving. It's the same pattern. We're given this vast özgürlük alanı, this wide area of freedom and flexibility, and we choose to fence it in with unnecessary discussions and self-imposed rules. Often, it comes from wanting absolute certainty or maybe a fear of making a choice that isn't perfect.
And sometimes, as our source points out, this tendency puts on a kind of disguise. It looks like piety, but it's misguided piety. That struck me as a really poignant observation.
Yes, that's a very significant point.
This idea that some people genuinely believe that applying something in a more detailed way, maybe in an unnecessarily complicated way, lüzumsüz, as the source says, or in a self-burdening way, they think that makes them more tekvalya, more pious, that it earns them greater spiritual reward.
It speaks to a deep psychological need, perhaps for control, or this desire to earn favor through sheer effort, even if the effort isn't what was asked for.
Right.
Our source mentions examples like people spending lifetimes making up kasanamazun, missed prayers, often for periods before they were even fully observant, maybe from childhood, or setting these huge targets for dhikr, like hundreds or thousands of repetitions daily, believing that sheer volume equals greater devotion.
Okay, I can see how that might feel productive to someone.
Well, yes, and for some individuals, it might genuinely offer a sense of relief, a kind of spiritual comfort, or a feeling of making amends. But the critique offered by the source is sharp. It argues that this often places an immense, sometimes lifelong, and potentially overwhelming burden on them.
Which seems counterintuitive if the original guidance was meant to be freeing.
Exactly. It can contradict the very idea of ease, simplicity, and freedom that divine guidance often emphasizes. It can lead to a life of unnecessary rigor, maybe even guilt, rather than one of graceful submission and peace.
So, in trying to be more pious, they actually make their path harder, potentially leading to burnout or feeling like they can never measure up to these self-imposed standards. That's kind of tragic,
Yeah,
actually.
it is. The divine framework, as this perspective understands it, provides this wide özgürlük alanı, a vast open space. Think of it like a beautiful, huge park. It has clearly marked paths, clear boundaries, but within those boundaries, there's immense freedom to roam, explore, enjoy.
Okay.
But humans, in their tendency towards contention, often choose to shrink that space. They add layers of complexity, they build internal fences, create rules and obligations that weren't part of the original park design. They turn the park into a tangled maze of their own making.
And this contention, it doesn't always look like just arguing, right? You mentioned different manifestations.
Right, it's not always overt debate. You have those who, maybe genuinely but misguidedly, add complexity out of excessive zeal. They truly believe they're doing more good by being more strict, more detailed. They think more effort must equal more reward, even if the effort is misplaced.
Okay, that's one type.
Then you have others who might use debate, endless questioning, as a kind of smokescreen, an excuse for inaction, maybe covering a fundamental lack of sincerity or commitment. They aren't really ready to act, so they stall by intellectualizing, by creating contention around the guidance itself.
Finding reasons not to act, essentially.
Pretty much. And the common outcome, regardless of the motivation, whether it's misguided zeal or deliberate avoidance, is that the true intent, the spirit of the clear guidance, gets diluted. It gets distorted, or maybe just ignored altogether. The focus shifts. Instead of implementing the guidance, living by its essence, the energy goes into endless deliberation or following self-imposed intricate rules. And you lose the very life-giving core of the original clear instruction.
It's like being given that map to the treasure, but instead of following the map, you spend all your time debating the exact shade of ink used to print it or the quality of the paper.
That's a perfect analogy. You never get to the treasure.
Okay, so that struggle with complexity, with contention, it often leads directly into another major human tendency, doesn't it? Which brings us to the next verse, Kaf Surah 55.
Exactly. Verse 55 asks this almost incredulous question.
What does it ask?
It says, "And what prevented humanity from believing when guidance came to them and from seeking forgiveness from their Lord, except that the way of the ancients should come upon them, or that the punishment should come before their eyes?"
Wow. So basically, why don't we just believe and act when guidance is clear? Why do we wait? Why do we need history's painful lessons repeated or to see the punishment firsthand?
It's a critical question, hitting on this deep-seated human tendency to delay, to postpone believing, to put off acting on clear guidance, to defer seeking forgiveness or making amends until we're directly confronted with the consequences.
Right before our eyes.
Exactly. It's as if individually and collectively we need to see history repeat itself in painful ways or feel the direct sting of a negative outcome before we truly deeply internalize a lesson. It's a very costly way to learn.
It really is. It's like we have this insistence on needing to experience everything ourselves. Even if the warning signs are flashing bright red, or if countless others have already made the exact same mistake right before us, there's a real stubbornness there, isn't there?
A profound stubbornness.
Yeah.
And our source discusses this as a recurring historical pattern. Human societies constantly seem to be struggling against or ignoring divine laws and universal principles.
How so?
Well, look at all the different unitum tars lari, the governance models humanity has experimented with throughout history. We've tried theocracy, monarchy, oligarchy, constitutional monarchy, then later communism, Nazism, socialism, and now predominantly democracy. Many variations.
Okay, so lots of different systems. What's the critique from this perspective? Are they all just flawed?
The critique isn't necessarily that every single aspect is inherently bad. Rather, They're presented as humanity's continuous attempts to manage ourselves without fully integrating or acknowledging a divine foundation or those universal principles we talked about.
Ah, so they're missing a key ingredient.
Essentially. Because they lack that foundational understanding, they tend to be continuously incomplete, often problematic. They often arise from this very struggle, this sedesme, this contention against universal laws. And so they end up replicating previous errors or introducing new complications because they fail to address the root causes, the flaws in human nature itself.
So they're like patches on a fundamentally flawed operating system rather than looking at the core code.
That's a good way to think about it. They address symptoms, perhaps, but not the underlying condition.
Okay, so it's not that these systems are necessarily evil in intent, maybe, but incomplete because they ignore this fundamental layer of guidance. And we just keep trying, failing, trying again, somehow expecting a different result each time.
Which leads directly to that common saying you often hear, experience is the best teacher.
Right. But our sources seem to offer a much more cautious view on that, don't they?
They absolutely do. While yes, it's a common human trait to want to deny imle, to experience things firsthand, to test outcomes for ourselves, learn by doing, the counter-argument from the source is very clear. Te krube pahali beard redmendir. Experience is an expensive teacher.
Expensive in what way?
Expensive in terms of pain, loss, suffering, wasted time, missed opportunities. Why pay that incredibly high price when the lesson is already known? When it's freely available, clearly articulated through past examples, historical consequences, divine warnings, there's often no need to personally suffer every consequence when the wisdom is right there for the taking.
That's such a powerful contrast. Wisdom offered freely versus knowledge gained through painful, costly tuition. And it reminds me, our source connects this ancient wisdom to a quote from Albert Einstein.
Yes, the definition of insanity.
Exactly, Einstein's definition of insanity, or Lilac, as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
It fits perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does. It's presented as this modern echo of humanity's ancient, recurring pattern. We see the historical track record, we hear the warnings, we witness the consequences for others, yet we persist in repeating the same mistakes, often with this, I don't know, naive hope that this time it'll be different for us.
It's a societal and often deeply personal form of, well, madness, as Einstein put it.
It's a profound link between ancient scripture and modern observation, highlighting this timeless, frustrating truth about our species.
And we see this play out in so many real-world ways. Take the journey analogy the source uses.
Okay.
Imagine someone starting a challenging journey. Experienced travelers, people who've walked that path before, warn them explicitly. Look out for the treacherous river crossing here. There's often a rock slide around this bend. Be careful of this hidden pitfall. They're told, prepare this way, take these precautions, bring this specific gear.
Seems like sensible advice.
You'd think so. But instead, this person insists on facing those obstacles unprepared. Maybe out of arrogance, I know better. Maybe out of a belief that they are somehow special, exempt.
It won't happen to me.
Exactly. And inevitably, they often incur great cost to their health, their peace of mind, their time, their resources. They wanted to test it for themselves, only to learn a lesson that was offered freely, without pain.
It's a kind of willful ignorance sometimes, isn't it? A stubbornness that leads straight into avoidable suffering.
Pretty precisely. Or think about health and psychology. How many people ignore clear, evidence-based health warnings about diet, exercise, stress management?
Until it's too late, often.
Right. They say, oh, it won't happen to me, or I'm too busy, I'll deal with it later. Only when the punishment, the consequence, the severe illness, chronic pain, significant psychological distress manifests directly before their eyes, sometimes irreversibly, do they finally reconsider their choices and seek change.
The guidance was there all along. The warning signs were clear, but the action was postponed until crisis hit.
Yes. And we see it on a larger scale, too, in societal blind spots. A society might face a severe collective punishment. Our source mentions something like a widespread virus, but it could be an economic collapse, widespread environmental damage, social breakdown.
Okay.
But instead of truly acknowledging it as such, as a profound lesson, as a consequence demanding deep change, they might react with a verdumdumas attitude, apathetic, uncaring, dismissive. Let's just get back to normal.
Without learning the lesson.
Exactly. They might even double down on the very behaviors or systems that led to the crisis in the first place, rather than transforming their understanding and behavior, which of course just leads inevitably back into the same cycles.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Which brings us to a really crucial distinction that the source emphasizes. The difference between takiq kivam and taklidi kivam.
Okay, what do those mean?
Takiq translates roughly to verification, scrutiny, critical thinking, independent inquiry. It's about arriving at faith or conviction through one's own understanding and personal investigation.
Okay, active investigation.
Yes. Whereas taklid is more like blind imitation. Uncritical adherence to tradition or just following what others believe without personal verification or deep understanding.
Got it. So one is personally verified, the other is inherited or imitated.
Precisely. And the source stresses the absolute importance of questioning gismisticular and sunneti, the ways of the ancients, the inherited traditions, the established norms, not rejecting them out of hand, but scrutinizing them.
Asking tough questions.
Asking, are these traditions truly aligned with universal divine law? Do they genuinely solve our current problems? Or are they just habits we've inherited, passed down without critical thought? Are they life-giving now?
So it's not about disrespecting the past, but about critically engaging with it, holding it up to the light of timeless truth and reason and seeing if it still holds up today.
Exactly. Because the consequence of taklid, of blind imitation, is that it fundamentally prevents individuals from taking personal responsibility for their beliefs and actions.
How?
If you're just following blindly, you're not truly engaged intellectually or spiritually. You haven't internalized it. This leads directly to repeating historical mistakes, both on a personal level and as a society, because you haven't understood why the mistake was made before.
You're just repeating the pattern without understanding it.
Right. True faith or true conviction, from this perspective, requires individual inquiry and understanding. It means you don't just believe something because your parents did or your community does or because it's comfortable. You believe it because you've scrutinized it, you've wrestled with it, you understand it, and it aligns with those clear, life-giving principles revealed in the universe and through guidance.
So it's about personal validation, personal conviction, not just conforming.
It's an active, ongoing process of seeking understanding, not a passive inheritance you just accept without question.
That makes sense. An active faith, an active understanding.
Okay, now let's shift focus slightly to the third verse in this sequence, Kehf Surah 56. This one brings us to a critical understanding of the true function of messengers, of prophets, of guides.
All right, what does verse 56 tell us?
It says, "And we send not the messengers except as bringers of good tidings and warners, and those who disbelieve contend with falsehood to undermine the truth and take my verses and my warnings as a mockery."
Okay, so it clearly lays out this dual role, bringers of good tidings and warners.
Yes, and understanding these terms precisely is crucial. Mubashir, bringers of good tidings, those who convey positive news. They communicate the joyful outcomes, the rewards, the peace that comes from aligning your life with these universal divine principles.
So the positive path.
Right, they explain how this alignment leads to a happy, healthy, fulfilling life, both here and hereafter. Then you have Muzir, the warners.
The other side of the coin.
Exactly. They inform people about the potential negative consequences, the pitfalls, the dangers that arise from deviating from these principles. And very significantly, they hold people responsible for their own choices.
Ah, that individual accountability again.
Crucially, a messenger doesn't take on the sins of others. They don't act as guarantors for anyone's salvation. Their role is purely to deliver the message with clarity, both the good news and the warnings. The choice and the consequence remain with the individual.
That's a really vital distinction, isn't it? Individual accountability. The messenger delivers the map, maybe lights the way with a lantern, but you have to walk the path, your choices, your responsibility. There's no delegating your sin or your salvation to the guide.
Absolutely. And our source gives a really powerful, almost stark example to drive this home. The Prophet Muhammad's warning to his own beloved daughter, Fatima.
Even his own daughter.
Yes. Even she, his cherished daughter, was reminded unequivocally of her individual accountability before God. He made it crystal clear that her lineage, her close connection to him, would not automatically shield her from the consequences of her own actions. It powerfully reinforces the idea that the message is universal. It applies to everyone, without exception. And responsibility is entirely personal. Regardless of your status, your family ties, your connection to a messenger, it completely prevents any idea of inherited spiritual privilege or getting a free pass.
Which then leads to another really critical point that our source highlights. This very human tendency we have to focus on the messenger's persona rather than the message itself.
Yes, that's a huge trap.
People get caught up in, the messenger's physical appearance, their personal habits, their perceived status, Or maybe they build elaborate rituals around the messenger, rather than deeply engaging with the universal, life-giving guidance they actually brought.
It's like obsessing over the details of the artist's personal life instead of truly contemplating and appreciating the masterpiece they created. You missed the whole point.
Yeah.
And this tendency is identified by the source as a major bala, a calamity, a profound affliction. It's seen as rampant in many religious groups, maybe cults, and even in secular movements that form around charismatic leaders.
How does that manifest?
The problem arises when followers start looking to the Shay, the lighter, the religious teacher, the spiritual guide, the political leader, as the ultimate authority, sometimes even infallible, instead of critically evaluating the leader's teachings against foundational truths, against the original pure divine guidance, or even against basic reason.
So instead of using their own God-given intellect, their own discernment, and their critical thinking, they essentially outsource it all to the leader.
That's exactly it. Outsourcing their thinking, their spiritual judgment, their moral compass.
And the consequence of that.
Often it's blind obedience, a suppression of individual intellect and critical thought. It fosters a suru mentality, a herd mentality. Individuals stop using their own minds to scrutinize, verify, understand. They become mere followers, adopting beliefs and practices without genuine personal conviction or deep understanding.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous, actually.
It is, and it directly undermines that core principle we keep coming back to. Aletan baske ila yoktur. There is no God, no ultimate authority, but the one God.
How does it undermine that?
Because that principle, understood deeply,
Yeah.
implies that no human being, not even a prophet, let alone a later leader or scholar, should be glorified or followed so blindly that it compromises your own individual critical thinking, your direct accountability to the divine, or your freedom and responsibility to understand the message for yourself.
So the messenger is a guide, a conduit, maybe a perfect example to learn from, but not someone who takes away your direct line, your direct responsibility.
Precisely. The ultimate relationship, the ultimate accountability is always individual, directly between the human being and the divine source of guidance. Allah, as the source puts it, leaves humans face to face with Allah. No intermediaries who can assume your responsibility or block your direct connection.
Okay. So the divine message itself is the ultimate authority, the ultimate truth we should engage with, not necessarily the person who delivered it, however revered they might rightly be. It's about the truth living within you, through your own understanding, not just being dictated externally.
Beautifully put, absolutely. Now, the verse concludes by stating that those who disbelieve or reject this guidance, they contend with falsehood to undermine the truth and take my verses and my warnings as a mockery.
Mockery. That sounds quite strong. What does that mean, to mock divine verses and warnings? Is it just laughing at them?
It can be literal ridicule, open derision, certainly. But the source suggests it's often something more profound, maybe more insidious. It's a deep disregard, a trivialization of immense life-altering truths, a refusal to take them seriously, to integrate them into your life, to actually live by them. It's treating profound guidance as if it's irrelevant, optional, inconsequential.
So it's less about active ridicule and more about passive dismissal, treating something sacred as mundane.
Often, yes. And how does this mocking or trivialization manifest in the real world beyond just, say, theological debates?
Yeah, what does that look like practically?
It manifests as a pervasive, often unconscious battle for values. Humans, when they effectively mock these deeper truths, end up prioritizing temporary, fleeting, worldly gains. Things like money, possessions, power, status, immediate gratification, superficial approval from others.
Okay.
They prioritize those things over lasting values like honor, integrity, dignity, true inner peace, justice, compassion, and eternal well-being. Our source actually uses the word comical, to describe this choice.
Comical? Why comical?
Because it's seen as genuinely absurd in a tragic sort of way. How readily we humans choose ephemeral, passing values, things that glitter but fade over enduring ones. We effectively mock or devalue what truly matters, what has lasting significance, by chasing illusions.
That's a stark way to put it. Trading something of infinite, lasting value for something temporary, something that will ultimately turn to dust. We see that everywhere, don't we? Chasing the latest trend instead of building solid character. Accumulating wealth at the expense of genuine human connection. Seeking fleeting fame over making a lasting, positive contribution.
Exactly. It's that absurd exchange, played out daily. And the source contrasts this common pendency with the prophet's own life, particularly when he was a powerful state leader.
So.
Despite holding immense political power and influence, he consistently chose to live a life of profound humility. He prioritized true, enduring values, justice, compassion, truthfulness, service over worldly pomp, luxury, or personal gain. His life serves as this stark, living counterexample to the societal obsession with superficial wealth, status, and fleeting desires.
So his life itself was a demonstration against that mockery.
In a way, yes. Those who mock or disregard divine warnings are, in essence, prioritizing momentary gratification over long-term, even eternal well-being. They're disregarding the true sources of life, meaning, and lasting value, often for the sake of something ultimately hollow. They act as if the temporary is permanent and the permanent is trivial. That's the core of the mockery.
Okay, wow. So we've covered a lot. The clarity of guidance, our tendency to complicate and delay, the true role of messengers. Let's try to synthesize this. What does this all mean for us right now, living our lives today? How do we take these insights from ancient texts and apply them?
Well, I think this entire deep dive fundamentally boils down to underscoring the absolute necessity of sorgalama. That means constant questioning, critical scrutiny, independent inquiry in every aspect of our lives.
Not just religion, then.
Not at all. It's a direct call to action. Don't passively accept traditions, inherited norms, or the status quo without real examination. It directly challenges that deeply ingrained mentality of boiled guilty, boiled getter. It came this way, so it'll always go this way. That kind of fatalistic acceptance.
Right, break that cycle.
Exactly. We need to be constantly, actively asking, is there actually a problem here? In this belief I hold, in this practice our community follows, in this societal norm, and then asking, does this truly align with universal divine law, with timeless ethical principles, with basic human flourishing, and crucially, what truly brings life, enduring value, genuine well-being, versus what merely offers temporary comfort or conformity or convenience?
And this applies across the board. Career, relationships, personal growth, how we engage with society.
Everywhere. It's about adopting an active stance towards knowledge, towards faith, towards living itself, rather than a passive one.
That sounds incredibly empowering, actually. It shifts the locus of control, doesn't it? From being just reactors to circumstances or traditions to being proactive choosers.
It is absolutely empowering
But
because this critical questioning process enables what the source calls Kindine Bir Hayat Yaşam Tarzı, one's own authentic life and lifestyle, a life truly chosen and lived by the individual based on understanding.
you become the chooser.
You become Sisi Shialom, the chooser, the one making deliberate, informed decisions based on your own scrutiny and understanding, rather than just following a pre-written script or conforming to external pressure. This fosters profound personal responsibility and genuine agency.
You're not just an actor reading lines someone else wrote.
Exactly.
Reco.
You're actively writing your own script, but informed by scrutinized wisdom and universal principles. In this critical process, it helps individuals truly understand themselves better, understand their community more deeply, and develop genuine, sustainable solutions to the problems they face. It leads, ideally, to a sakaktif bir bayre ve toplum, a very active, engaged, conscious, and responsible individual and society.
It's not about rebellion for rebellion's sake, then. It's about being profoundly awake and accountable.
Precisely. It's about being truly uyanik awake, not just physically awake, but mentally awake, spiritually awake, intellectually aware and present in your life.
Shaking off that complacency.
Yes. Shaking off the complacency that can so easily lull us into blind acceptance or endless procrastination or getting stuck in unproductive arguments.
That makes sense.
So ultimately, this deep dive encourages a constant state of active awareness, actively seeking what is hayat viran, life-giving, truly beneficial, genuinely valuable, rather than falling into apathy or blind imitation or pointless debate or that perpetual postponement we talked about.
Living with purpose and clarity.
Yes. It encourages a life lived with purpose, with clarity, and with profound personal responsibility, always seeking genuine understanding and deep insight, rather than just superficial adherence or doing what's easy or comfortable. It's about finding the true path to well-being, a path hopefully free from many of the unnecessary burdens and anxieties we so often place upon ourselves, simply because we haven't truly questioned, truly understood, or truly acted on the clear guidance that's already available to us.
It's an invitation to step up, isn't it? To be those responsible, awakened stewards we were meant to be.
That's a perfect way to frame it. An invitation to authentic living.
Okay, so let's try and summarize our deep dive today. We can maybe distill these profound insights into a few core slogans, maybe takeaways that we hope will resonate with you, our listeners.
Sounds good. I can start. First, guidance is fundamentally clear. Our human challenge, often, is to actively avoid adding our own self-imposed complexity. Don't build fences where there's open space.
Okay, I like that. Second, learn from the past, learn from wisdom. Don't wait for disaster to be your only teacher. Experience is expensive, wisdom is often free if you seek it. Choose the wiser path.
Third, focus intensely on the message, not just the messenger. True growth, genuine understanding comes from critical inquiry and personal conviction, not from blind devotion or outsourcing your own intellect.
And finally, fourth, an active, truly fulfilling life demands constant inquiry, taking personal responsibility for your choices and understanding, and a relentless, unyielding pursuit of truth, clarity, and genuine, lasting value.
And maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. If we truly, deeply embrace the inherent clarity and the profound freedom that seems to be presented in these verses, just imagine how our daily anxieties, the immense burdens we often place on ourselves, might simply melt away.
That's a powerful image.
How different would our world look collectively if we chose to learn primarily from timeless wisdom rather than constantly, painfully relearning the same lessons through avoidable suffering and these endless cycles of error?
That's definitely something to reflect on. We really hope this deep dive has offered you some powerful insights to think about, maybe apply in your own life. What other complex topics or profound sources would you like us to explore and unpack together? Let us know. And please join us next time for another deep dive.
And finally, if you found this deep dive valuable today, please do take a moment to like the video and subscribe to our channel. We truly appreciate your support. It helps us keep doing this.
Thanks for listening.